Information for our attendees. So I'm going to ask a few questions to our speakers. So you prepare also your questions, because Mr. Fantini left 5 or 6 of these magazines of European Conservative. So who asks the question gets a magazine. Yeah, this is a market economy. So one question for our guest, Mr. Chafouin. You mentioned this monster combination, big government and big corporations. So what would you advise for a small country like Croatia, which is already a part of a European Union? So we are already in a big monster, and then we are entering Eurozone also from 1st of January, and Schengen zone, so we will be in this inner part. You know, what can a small country do to fight against some things that, for example, big corporations do, that they are now entering this cultural zone with the money and all of these links that they have. For example, you mentioned also Soros Foundation, where they want to even influence on the culture. You know, that is what worries us in the Center for Renewal of Culture.
Well, the
corporate woke.
Yeah. Well, on the side of government, well, I side with those who want to reduce the size of government, but not only that, but especially the proper role of government of helping establish the legal framework in which a free economy should operate, I think should be biased in favor of new entrants into the market. You know, so again, you don't have many people in extreme poverty in Croatia. But I think the best way to practice the preferential option for the poor is basically to liberate markets and entry requirements for the people who are on the bottom of the ladder. So I would be very careful. I do not know enough about if you have, antitrust, and anti-monopoly laws.
Yes.
Yeah, so if that exists, I would be pretty aggressive, again, I do not know enough of the legal techniques, how to prevent abuse from corporations, but yes to shame them, yes to block them with contracts with the government, for example, like Governor DeSantis did with Disney. Take a look at all those companies gotten big with a gradual process of working in collusion with the great government agencies in countries and in international agencies. So I would be more aggressive regarding that. The big topic in the United States right now is, among conservatives, is should we ask the state to play a role in breaking up some of these companies, and again, I would not rent my garments if something like that happens. It happened with the oil companies and with the telephone companies. I'm always afraid, that the people that you put in charge, will be similar, than the people who are today in positions of control. It's called in economics regulatory capture. And so they divide the market into many small ones, but then the new people cannot come in. So basically that's as much as I can say. But I gave the example of banking. Some of the supposedly well-intentioned laws, to regulate banking so there will not be abuses, are so cumbersome that only the big banks can pay them. And so the small banks in Main Street, as we say in the United States, they can never grow. The moment you grow in many areas of the economy today, immediately one of these big companies buy you. So the moment that you become big selling something in social media, if you're not part of the network of Google or Facebook, well, they don't let you operate. They censor you. So again, we are seeing a very, in one of my presentations in an organization called the Council for National Policy in the United States, I was asked how people see the corporate world, and see us champions of the free economy, because many times they see us as defending that big corporate world. And I mentioned that before, in the communist times in your country, in Argentina, you had to carry the membership card of the Socialist Party or the Peronist Party if you wanted to rise up. Now, if you don't carry the so-called woke, the politically correct membership card, LGBT plus, defending all this craziness, that exists today, you really have to keep your mouth shut in the corporation, in the law firm, or leave. There's an oppressive climate in many of those organizations. So I think all civil society has to play a role in exposing it, in combating, and some of who are in position of government to be more aggressive, in using the power of the state in a consensus that hopefully will be the culture that your organization defends. So, but it's not an easy question. But we are seeing in some countries the pushback, and take a look at how they're pushing back and try to replicate them.
One question for Mr. Harris, one simple one, and practical one, to go from the philosophy to the actual.
It's quite a compliment.
Yeah. Margaret Thatcher became a prime minister of Great Britain in 1979. So before there was this governments that tend to be social, big governments, etc. What did you do? You were there as her advisor, working in this research department of the Conservative Party. What did you do to make that government small? What happened actually?
Well, is this working?
Yeah.
I didn't do much, but I'll tell you what they did. I was there scribbling briefs and so on. But I was just to say, I joined the Treasury, our finance department, in 1981 after the crucial 1981 budget. So, I do have, therefore, insights into it. It's just that I don't want to take credit for it. This idea of, who is that Democrat mayor, never let a crisis go to waste. Anyway, him.
Not Carvel, all of them say that.
Yeah, but this particular...
Ralph
Emanuel. Yeah, he was, of course, the great... Yeah, it made a great scandal, and he was close to Obama. He said, never let a crisis go to waste. That was a very cynical remark, but there is truth in this sense that Margaret Thatcher came to power in a crisis. Now, a crisis does two things. One is it creates enormous number of, it's like a fire, like a storm, but a storm which you're at the center and the wind is coming sort of around from all sorts of areas, and there is flotsam and jetsam running through the air. So you are hit by things that you do not expect to be hit by, at times you do not expect to be hit by. And it is an enormous test, like war, of your character and your self-control and your intelligence, actually. And she was up to that. But it does also give you opportunities. That's what I'm saying, that in a crisis, people will listen. And what she was telling them was that today's crisis, which there had been huge strikes in the winter of 78, 79 under the Labour government, that they had fallen out with the biggest power in the state, namely the trade unions, and the trade unions refused to accept the incomes policies that the Labour government was trying to impose to deal with the inflation, which was running fairly high. And in this crisis, what she argued was that this was a systemic crisis. This wasn't just a crisis that one government had got a few things wrong, but that actually the country had been going in the wrong direction for many years. Now, many of the Conservatives, I should say, did not like this because they'd been in power while a lot of this was going in the wrong direction. In other words, the wrong direction of big government, high spending, high borrowing, printing too much money, subsidizing, not closing down loss-making industries, and a lack of realism, to use John's word. And she was able to use that crisis in order to, first of all, stop government spending growing and then hold it. Now, actually cutting government spending is a different matter. If we talk just about government spending, what you want to do, in general, you need to squeeze government spending. That's quite enough because of the inbuilt thrust of everybody wanting more money and never wanting to lose their jobs and so on. You've got to squeeze that, and then you create the conditions for growth. Because if the size of government stays the same and the size of the economy gets bigger, everybody is better off. You can afford the government. But actually cutting government at a time of economic decline is very difficult. But because of the crisis, that's the answer. She was able to do it because of the crisis and because she knew what she wanted.
Okay. But what exactly did she cut in spending? Today in Croatia, we also have that problem, you know. What to cut? Everybody says we cannot cut nothing. So
well, first of all,
transfers to people?
Well, in 1980, the rate of increase of pensions was reduced. So that pensions from then on went up, these old age state pensions went up in line with inflation rather than with wages. Now that had a potential increase. But there wasn't much cut of public spending. This is the point. There wasn't much cut of public spending. It was just held. And one of the big problems was that just before that 79 election, there had been an investigation, I've forgotten the name who did it, there was a report into civil service, that's government employee pay. And lo and behold, it was discovered that everybody needed to be paid more. And this was a way that the Labour Party had devised of buying off the strikers. And the issue was, I do remember this, as to whether the government would accept these so-called pay differentials and the promises involved. And it was believed that we had to accept that or we wouldn't win the election, just to understand. I mean, that's the sort of compromise you have to make. But it was pretty disastrous because from then on you had this inbuilt momentum of public sector pay. Now, another aspect, of course, of the public sector is the industrial sector. Shipbuilding, which you know about, steel, which is not such a big issue for you, but steel, shipbuilding, and then coal. Now, we didn't deal with that, and we did that bit by bit. The shipbuilding industry, basically, we closed it down and gave money to people in redundancy payments, and they actually, many of them did actually use it to start new businesses, those who were competent to do so. And many of those technically qualified people can. The steel, which had been the result of billions and billions of public expenditure, but which was completely outclassed by competition. So there was competition from Korea and Japan, all these places, and textiles, incidentally, also competition from India then. And so this was a collapsing industrial sector, really. And so you had to keep on paying money out, but there were one-off payments, after all. These are one-off payments. So this was not actually, that was a long-term control. And in the short term, in 1981, well, the first budget did cut marginal rates of income tax. But the most important budget in the spring of 1991 put up tax rates. It put up tax rates in order to reduce borrowing. And this was in order to allow interest rates to fall, to create the conditions for recovery. And that was the most difficult thing to do. Because here we come in saying we believe in free enterprise, low taxes and so on, and we're doing the opposite. And because I think Margaret Thatcher had the credibility with people, they knew that she wanted to do this as a strategy. And if she said that this was a short-term deviation to get back onto this road, they accepted it. They didn't like it, but they accepted it. And that was, of course, because she was quite right. She did believe in a small state, low-tax economy. But you have to, particularly in those days, you had really to reassure the markets in a way that the British government hasn't done at the moment, but it isn't so drastic today. You had to reassure the markets that you were not going to be going bankrupt. So these were very, very difficult conditions. And as I say, the answer is to stabilize. And that was the word. John Hoskins, her main advisor, said what he wanted from the economy and the whole of dealing with that was stability. If you have a stable platform, and of course inflation and strikes, this shakes all of this platform. There's no confidence in it. Get stability, and from this stability, you can actually get onto the right trajectory.
Okay, anybody from the audience? Okay.
My name is Krva, and I have a question for Mr. Bartulica. You spoke about free market, free economy, and resistance among the population in Croatia. But the fact that the private sector, at least in coastal part of Croatia, does not invest in factories. They don't invest in IT sector, pharmaceutical industry or car industry. They invest in apartment building, which lead to devastation of the coast. Latest example are project of golf resort on Brooklyn Lake. Do you think that the state should protect our coast from devastation, or is the free market more important?
I would say that's a good question. I would say the economy exists. The economy exists for the sake of man, not the other way around. And the state serves the interests of man, of the citizen. And so the question is how to reach a balance. We have a beautiful coastline, no one can deny that. We have to be prudent, prudent in deciding what kind of buildings we will permit to be constructed in certain areas, especially the coast. So there is the experience of certain countries that allowed for development, over commercialization, and this to the degree that it became unappealing for many tourists because the natural beauty was destroyed. So there is an argument to be very cautious and to preserve what's most beautiful in our country in order to keep the tourists coming, because we really have a uniquely beautiful coastline and country. So I'm for prudence. But on the other hand, we have lots of real estate, lots of undeveloped space, uninhabited islands where no one lives, absolutely no one. In other areas, the population has been reduced to the point that you only have, maybe in some villages, 50 people living in the winter time. Where my father-in-law went to school as a young child on the island of Prvić, this is near Šibenik, Prvić Šepurine. When my father-in-law was a young boy there were 300 school children on the island, on this small island, near Vodice and Šibenik, 300. Now there's no children. There's perhaps 3 or 4 children that live on the island and go to elementary school. So what is the point of having a beautiful coastline if we don't offer economic opportunity for people to actually live and prosper? I'm not saying that the solution is just building, villas or apartments, but you have to ask the question why investors are not coming, for example, from the German car industry to build factories in Croatia. First of all, there's a chronic labor shortage in Croatia. There's not enough workers. If you'd have to build a plant and hire 1,000 skilled workers in, let's say, a more rural area of Croatia, where do you find these people? Will they be Croats or will they be from elsewhere who will come here to work? This situation was perhaps different 20 years ago, but we missed, so to speak, we missed the train. We missed that opportunity, and that investment largely went to Slovakia and other places that have now car production. But it's not all just about hard production or industry. We can succeed as a modern economy with services, with innovation that doesn't necessarily include large plants with thousands of people. The modern economy has changed, and there is obviously disruption and a certain amount of pain that is experienced through this. And one example is the shipbuilding that we developed through a long tradition. Incidentally, Alex's family was involved on his mother's side in shipbuilding here in Croatia on the island of Lošinj. So we have a very long tradition. But the reality is today our shipbuilding yards cannot compete with Korea, with China, with these more developed economies. We cannot compete. And so the question is, does it make sense for the government to subsidize basically bankrupt industries like the shipyards in Pula or Rijeka or Split? We were spending billions and billions of kuna every year in an artificial way, maintaining these shipyards, which are still they have still not become competitive. So the question is the allocation of resources. What is the most prudent way to allocate scarce resources? And the experience shows that this policy of subsidizing so-called strategic industries like shipbuilding has been a great failure, has been a tremendous failure. This amount of money, had it been invested in a wiser way by the government, maybe we would have more flourishing communities in certain parts of Croatia, but we don't. We don't. So that's where I get back to, we live in a competitive world. It's not just enough to say shipbuilding is strategic, we have to invest, when we know that the reality is we can't compete with China and Korea and others. So where can we compete? Clearly, tourism, we're very competitive, so that we have to preserve this position where our country has a tremendous advantage, comparative advantage to others. But we have to look at places where we can, why aren't we educating, for example, more engineers and IT people who are in demand? We're not educating more. Many of them simply, they get hired easily here in Croatia because there's a shortage of these people. But again, the state has not adapted to the real needs of the market. And we see this through the quota system where the government every year allocates the number of students that can enroll in different public universities. This is not in line with the needs of the market, unfortunately. We're educating far too many economists, even lawyers that will not find jobs in their field. We're overproducing them. On the other side, we're underproducing many. And finally, when it comes to manual labor, we have an acute shortage of manual workers. So who will rebuild Zagreb and Banovina after the earthquake? Foreign workers, because our young people or people who are able to do these jobs are gone and they will not come back. But the reality is if you were interested in making a good living and you had skilled, you were talented with your hands, or you learned a certain trade, you would be working 12 hours a day throughout Croatian cities. You cannot find today people who will fix something in your flat or your home or paint an apartment. You cannot find these people. If they tell you we're available 2 months from now, you're very pleased with that. Or mechanics. No one wants to be a car mechanic. They're in demand everywhere. So that's the reality of the market. If you were really interested in keeping Croatia competitive and you would have to educate these young people where the jobs are. I've met people who say they make more money than even members of Sabor, these maintenance people who come to your flat and fix your appliances. They're in demand. They could be working 12 hours a day, but they can't divide the labor because they're alone. The young people don't want to do these jobs. That's just a small example of how our country has not made this, shift, and we're just going to have to import workers, unfortunately. So I hope that answered at least partly your question.
I want to ask him something and compliment, because what he said about Loshinj in 1868, it was the most developed merchant marine almost in the world, ahead of Trieste, ahead of Venice. I do not know enough of the tax structure in that period. And I would be tempted to think that there was a favorable tax policy that at the time existed in Croatia. And then from 12,000 people, because there was a technological change when the steam engine came, it went to 8,000. And when communism came, socialism came, huge emigration, and only 2,000 people remain after socialism. But my question to you is, can you apply the subsidiarity principle here in Croatia? In the United States, we have federalism. And when Robin Harris spoke about Hayek and the spontaneous order, one of the most famous papers of Hayek was competition as a discovery procedure. And although we have federal taxes, we have a lot of freedom in the United States. Each province, each state can establish its own level of taxation. You mentioned about the euro, I still don't know, because I see money sometimes like a measuring, but I don't like as a measuring rod, which is great, for tourism and all that, but I don't like what comes with it of mandates. Now, do you, when you speak about building codes, or subsidies or tax structure, I'm afraid, this in Europe they want to push also the no tax competition in Europe.
Harmonization.
Well, but I'm asking you, in Croatia, do you support that each region could establish its own rules, or it has to be a federal policy, a national policy?
So that's very interesting and an excellent question. So first, there is local autonomy regarding building codes, this kind of thing. So every županija in Croatia, there's 20, which is far too many, by the way. We have 20 regional units that are called županija. Our population, I think, it would be more reasonable to have perhaps 5 of these regional units and then the city of Zagreb. But we have 20, which creates lots of layers of bureaucracy, which always, are sort of places where corruption happens and so on. You have to pay these civil servants. But there is autonomy regarding how to develop land and what can be built and not built. These decisions are made more locally. Unfortunately, There's no competition on tax policy within the country. And that's a shame. That's a shame. So it's very much decided in Zagreb and I would say, I would prefer that the local authorities have more say in how this revenue is spent, but most of it is after tax goes to the central budget, and then the central budget in Zagreb reallocates this money back to the local. So there isn't enough of this local self-government, which is very part of the secret of America's success. So it is a small country. So in America, it makes sense. You know, you have Florida, you have California, Texas, these big states that are almost, you know, the economies are the size of, you know, many countries. In Croatia, we're far from that, but it would be interesting to open this debate, because if you got the tax policy right in certain areas, you would be rewarded clearly, and then other areas would have the incentive to follow. So again, we're convinced that low taxes work. We're convinced that many of these decisions need to be made locally. This principle that Alex mentioned of subsidiarity is very important. Our main issue is with the European Union, because more and more of, you know, how we are allowed to live, these decisions are made in Brussels, and our, you know, citizens are not paying attention.
Okay, I hope that satisfies our asker. Does anybody else have a question?
Hello. Well, this was rather extensive answer, so I won't get back to this, although
bring it close to me. Bring it closer, the microphone.
This rather extensive answer was also quite interesting for me. So I will try to make just another one observation that also came here into my attention. Stephen, you said earlier that state doesn't create value. But I would like to take this point where I agree, state doesn't create intrinsic value, but state actually prints money. State actually prints money. Well, at least for a few months for Croatia. Yeah. And the money itself has intrinsic value. The money, not just a nominal value. We value money because it helps us to easily exchange our goods. We value money because it has some intrinsic value that is to some extent constant through time. So at certain sense we are ignoring these facts when we say that state doesn't create value. I mean, we should value the state at least for this reason, for stability and for the in a certain extent that it should at least guarantee fair exchange between parties. So I'd like to
deal with that, but money has no intrinsic value, and once you have no longer kunas and you have euros, you can see how much you can stand on the corner down in Split and see how much they'll give you for a kuna note. I don't think they give you a quarter of a spoonful of coffee for your. I mean, there is an intrinsic value in the sense of piece of paper. What I mean is that it has no intrinsic value. It is simply a means of exchange.
Yes, but we move this intrinsic value to the other token of value, which is now euro. In this sense, maybe we can compare this to cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are not stable, and you can't pay your electricity or your taxes with them. They don't have this basic value, which actually state is one which guarantees this value. This is what I would observe.
If I could, I don't know how much time we have, just briefly regarding the value of money and cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin, if it has value, part of the reason it has value is that there's a limited supply of Bitcoin. So it can't be, you can't create Bitcoin endlessly like that you could theoretically print euro or kuna. You could just keep going forever and ever. So in Germany, in the 1920s, when they had hyperinflation, their currency almost literally had zero value. zero value. And this value, what people believed, or what in reality it could buy, the Deutschmark, it was changing on a daily basis. And this led to, obviously, tremendous social unrest and, the rise of, Hitler and so on. So we have to be clear that we live in a world where central bankers decide what the money supply should be. I would agree with Robin that intrinsically, a kuna note, if you have zero confidence in the value of your currency, it doesn't mean much, right? So what's behind the value of a currency is people's belief that it actually tomorrow will that's why people save, for example, right, in certain currencies. So there's a lot of factors that have to deal with this. Maybe I'm not explaining it, I'm not an economist, but I think that it's, I would say it's not an absolute truth to say that money, printed money, has intrinsic value. I would dispute that.
In a similar fashion, I created a Center for Sound Money with Judy Shelton, who one of the greatest economists in the United States, that still is very active. Money is the most commonly used means of exchange by definition. It evolved through time, and most of us economists believe that, and the late scholastics, goods don't have value in themselves. They have value because we value them. What's the value of the tie? By the way, this we owe to the Croats, as you know. The word kravata comes from Croat, So, but what is the use of this? And we economists thought that money had to have some value from the market, any good, before it would become a means of exchange. First they use sheep, the pecore, pecunia comes from. So now, the other services of money is to serve as a unit of value, a unit of measurement, and as a reserve of value. Crypto has a little bit messed up because basically it's a ledger. It allows exchange. It has helped people, move money from one place to another, but it has not become a store of value and a good unit of measurement. Now, as I value the free economy, I like Hayek in the early 70s when inflation was exploding everywhere, except Venezuela had one of the best currencies in the world. He wrote a book called The Denationalization of Money. And I believe that in a free society, even if you have this paper money, which for me is a scandal, how today central bankers can take money away from your pocket, without voter authorization. For me, the manipulation of money and credit is a scandal, and it's almost criminal how it's being done, privileging one sector and friends of the central bank over others. But I would say, if you have the euro, allow free competition of currency, create your local currency in the best gold, and allow freedom of contract with other currencies, and without losing the benefit of people coming here with euros and not having to exchange, So, again, I think we have to continue to look forward. We'll see what will happen after this next financial crash.